Hello, I'm George Longenecker. Thanks to the Kellogg-Hubbard Library and Michelle Singer for making these recordings. Originally, I was going to read this short story as part of my hometown of Middlesex mud season series, but of course, everything has been canceled. But at least I can bring you my short story here. It's called Acquisitions. It was so lovely. Barbara had to add it to her acquisitions. Baccarat Millefiori, 1846. Miniature flowers sparkled through the glass paperweight. Wearing silk gloves, their National Park Service guide told the story of each of the artifacts. All these were gifts to President Van Buren while he was in office and after. The British ambassador to the US, Sir Richard Pakenham, came to New York and stayed here at Lindenwold in summer of 1846, 5 years after the president left office. He brought the president this magnificent paperweight. She handled it gently. It's perfectly preserved after 173 years. Moving on, another of our gifts is this Paul Revere silver tea service. This would be her most audacious acquisition yet. She was in luck, arriving in time for this special showing. 12 gifts, 19th century splendor at the Martin Van Buren National Historic Site. Surprisingly, their guide left the Baccarat Millefiori paperweight on the long dining room table as they moved to the next room. Barbara dropped her wallet. "Oh, sorry, I dropped my wallet." Their guide was busy with her tour, and Barbara was in and out of the dining room in 30 seconds. The Millefiori was in her pocket. In 40 years, she'd acquired 766 pieces, now 767. She'd begun her collection when she was 12. Her best friend Sylvia's father had a drawer full of antique gold and silver coins, which he'd shown her a couple of times. He liked a kid that showed such interest. On an overnight, she was alone downstairs while Sylvia was in the shower. Barbara chose a 1915 St. Gaudens $20 gold double eagle, now worth over $1,500. From that day until around her 13th birthday, she'd sung a little song in her head as she tried to sleep. Why did I do it? Why do I do it? Neither Sylvia's father nor Barbara's parents had ever mentioned the coin. Her collection grew. That coin had been her first and best acquisition until today. Now there were rare books, jeweled rings, necklaces, and a couple of antique Vermont license plates. Barbara Allen Simpson had been at Martin's Academy since she graduated from Middlebury College at 21, except for the year and a half at University of Arkansas, earning her MFA. After 30 years, she'd settled in with tenure. At the private high school, she taught 4 classes a year in American Lit and creative writing, was also assistant provost of students and cross-country ski coach. Her life was her students, books, writing, skiing, and her collection. Peter had left her 20 years ago, jealous and suspicious of her acquisitions, when he got a top job at Phillips Exeter. Her home in Stones River was cozy Vermont, filled with books and memorabilia. The roomy Victorian had a studio apartment she sometimes rented to visiting faculty and also listed on Airbnb. Her only bad experience had been a weekend guest who stole a poetry book off the shelves. Barbara had been appalled by such crass sleaziness. After leaving the National Historic Site, Barbara stopped at the Kinderhook Reformed Church Cemetery. It was easy to find the historic marker. Gravesite, Martin Van Buren, Governor of New York, 8th President of the United States. Barbara fingered the Millefiori in her leather bag, glass cool to the touch. Her pulse jumped when a U.S. Park Ranger patrol car passed and slowed down, but it turned the corner and was gone. She walked out to the grave. Cicadas sang. She was always awed standing over bones of someone famous, whether president or author. She'd certainly felt that way with Emily Dickinson and Robert Frost. Just down New York Route 9, she pulled into Kinderhook Antiques and Books. The back rooms were surprisingly dark and easy. There was a 1905-07 Vermont porcelain license plate, number 606, in excellent condition. Barbara wondered how it had ended up in a New York antique shop, not under lock and key. She knew antiques. This was rare, worth thousands. It was going back to Vermont where it belonged. In seconds, it was in her leather bag. Barbara prided herself on her eclectic taste. In the poetry book section, she found a first edition of Robert Frost, North of Boston, signed by the author, $475. It was in her bag. At the counter, she bought a newer Frost, You Come Too, for $15.50. The owner knew a lot of Frost's poems. They also got into Dickinson and Plath. Barbara paid cash. Thanks. Lovely meeting you. Come back to Kinderhook. Great talking poetry with you. Come to Vermont sometime. Her trip back to Vermont took 2.5 hours. Barbara was at home in Stones River for supper. After thawing some leftover eggplant parmesan, she poured a glass of Malbec. She laid out her acquisitions on the dining room table. It had been one of her best days ever, and the red wine was just right. Probably $10,000 total, and such beauty. The new Frost books would go in her study with poetry. The Vermont license plate went on the basement shelf with the others. Her prize of the trip, the Baccarat Millefiori, indeed sparkled with 1,000 flowers. It was her 5th and best paperweight. It had a place of honor in front of her china cabinet with 4 other paperweights and next to her favorite from the Courier Museum in New Hampshire. She thought she'd write an ekphrastic poem about the new one. I love you all. Come join the others, my flower. Barbara ate dinner alone as usual. She jotted down thoughts in her journal. Unsurpassed day and good to be back. Precious things. But all summer and all night, there's not much dialogue in my story because I'm always alone. She loved her collection. Another favorite was the fossil from Dylan Thomas's desk in his boathouse at Larne, a treasure from the Teachers and Writers Tour of Wales. There was the oval locket with its sepia-toned photos and the ivory cameo brooch she'd had since she visited a classmate in Arkansas. Her cousin's opal ring was safe in the drawer with the brooch. Her new books would be happy with Robert Frost's handwritten poem, Voiceways, from Middlebury College's special collections. She often recited its first line, "Some things are never clear." During the summer, Barbara only had to be at school 2 days a week for her provost job, no classes or skiing. She was going over applications from 3 students wanting to come for their senior years. Good ones, she said to Millie, the headmaster's executive assistant. The headmaster was on her annual vacation to Lake Champlain, and the school was quiet except for the sound of lawn tractors. Barbara's office was next to the headmaster's, with a big bay window overlooking a circular drive shaded by sugar maples. She looked up. 2 Vermont State Police cruisers pulled up, followed by a green and white U.S. Park Ranger patrol car. Barbara's heart beat faster. It could be about a student, but none were on campus. And why the National Park Service? 2 uniformed troopers and the park ranger stood over Millie in the reception area. Barbara Thompson? She went to the open door of her office. Yes, that's me. Her voice faint. She was sweating. The female Vermont trooper was the only one who spoke, while the other trooper and the ranger placed themselves on either side of her. Millie stood in the entrance to the headmaster's office, mouth agape. You were under arrest for theft of property from a National Historic Site, a federal felony. You were under arrest for shoplifting in Kinderhook, New York, a felony. You were under arrest for possession of stolen property, a felony. You were under arrest for interstate transportation of stolen property, a felony. You have the right to an attorney, to remain silent, and to waive extradition. Do you understand the charges? Yes. Come with us, please. I assume I don't have much choice. That's right. Lift your arms, put them down. The male trooper pulled her arms behind her in one motion and snapped on handcuffs. Millie gasped as Barbara was led out and placed in the back seat of a police cruiser. Barbara expected they'd go to the state police barracks in Rockingham, but instead they pulled up to her house on Main Street, where a Vermont State Police crime lab van was parked in her driveway. Ms. Simpson, get out, please. The trooper spoke like she meant it. We have a search warrant for your property at 37 Main Street, as well as your cell phone, home phone, and computer. Could you unlock the house so we don't have to do any damage? The officer uncuffed her and allowed her to find her keys. Arthur, her next door neighbor, raked his lawn as close as he could get to her property line. Her armpits and back were soaked with perspiration. The July day was already pushing 85 degrees. Barbara asked to see the warrant. Baccarat Millefiori glass paperweight, circa 1846, property of United States government, Martin Van Buren National Historic Site. 2, book by Robert Frost titled North of Boston, signed by author, 1914. 3, Vermont Auto Register porcelain license plate, number 606. 4, any receipts, phone records, or map searches from July 2019 related to travel and purchases in Kinderhook, New York. There were also photos of the paperweight. Looks pretty thorough, she whispered. The police were there for 4 hours searching and photographing. Meanwhile, Barbara was handcuffed again and driven across town to the state police barracks. There she was photographed and fingerprinted, then allowed to use the phone. She called an attorney in Brattleboro, the mother of one of her students. Amy, I have a little problem. Amy had been a state senator, prosecuting attorney, and now did defense. She certainly knew the law. Let me see what I can find out. Meanwhile, we'll see about bail. Never in her life had Barbara been in a jail. The police barracks holding cell was hot and stuffy. She could overhear troopers talking about her. This was way more interesting than their usual Interstate 91 traffic stops and drug busts. Amy was there an hour later, dark pantsuit and leather attaché case. She brought Barbara an iced tea and tuna sandwich from Country Deli. The good news, Barbara, is I think I can get you out without bail. The bad news is that you're here for the night until court opens in the morning. You should also know that the police have found other things and that they're photographing and may want to go in with a second warrant. My lovely collection. Barbara, is there anything else stolen? I'd say acquired, maybe. We'll talk more in the morning at the courthouse, but I need to have some idea what I'm up against here. Barbara hated to call her mother in South Burlington, but figured she'd better before the news broke. Arrested? Barbie, there's got to be a mistake. At 81, her mother had retired from teaching at UVM, but was still a city councilor and lived in the same house where she'd raised Barbara and 2 sisters. She was in her second year alone. Their father had died at 90. Barbie, this is hard to believe. We need a good lawyer. I've got one, Mom, but it won't be cheap. Well, it can come out of your share of the estate, what there is. Thanks, Mom. Did you do this? I'll talk to you about that later. Her mother vaguely remembered a couple of things missing from relatives and friends' homes. She'd never imagined her oldest daughter taking anything. Barbie had always been so smart and good-natured. She was reading at 4 and read to her younger sisters. Maybe they were a little permissive, never checked her room, but it was always so neat. A's in every class, good in literature and math, then a full scholarship to Middlebury at 17, graduated magna cum laude. Hands shaking, she tried to call her daughter back, but there was no answer. The next morning, a different female trooper brought Barbara egg with avocado on an English muffin and coffee that was surprisingly good. She let her use the shower and allowed her to wait outside her cell. At 8 a.m., she was handcuffed and driven in an unmarked car to district court in Brattleboro. She had time to meet with her attorney for an hour before the hearing. Amy brought her up to date. If we can get bail, you can go home. The search is over. That's the good news. I assume you have some bad news? Barbara was wearing the same sweat-stained clothes she'd gone to work in yesterday. Yes? Okay. They found some other things, did some quick investigating, and got a second search warrant. Okay. You had a 1799 book, Parks Travels in Africa. It's beautiful, the fold-out maps. Barbara, that book was probably taken from Rural Rare Books in Plainfield. It was listed as stolen and worth $750 to $1,000. I don't want to hear how you got it. Is there more? There is, Barbara. Okay. A 1913 Vermont porcelain license plate, number 042. Calvin Coolidge State Historic Site. Vermont State Parks listed it as missing in 2013. Not good. Not good. What's with the license plates, Barbara? Barbara, we have a lot of possible new charges. 2 more things. Shit. From University of Arkansas Library Special Collections, MFA, class of 93. Good program for writers. Great. The Academy paid for it. Looks like you may have kept some document. These things are much more appreciated with me. Christ, you just can't. Barbara, just possessing those things is a felony. You mean the handwritten short story by Carson McCullers and the Mark Twain postcard? Exactly. Those things may mean additional charges. But here's what's happening today. This is a bail and extradition hearing. Grand larceny from a National Historic Site going to a federal grand jury. Grand larceny from Kinderhook Books and Antiques. Today's about whether you agree to go to New York for arraignment in state court. Makes me look pretty bad. It's not good. You have New York, federal, and possibly Vermont, as well as Arkansas charges. Amy managed to get Barbara out with no bail, pending arraignment in New York, and drove her home to Stones River. This is a goddamn mess. The police had gone through everything. She showed Amy her acquisitions. As your lawyer, I don't want to know about the other stuff. You don't want to know. All I need to know is whether they removed anything not in the warrants. Hard to tell yet. You're a talented teacher, a beautiful home. Kids love you. Why? Barbara, why? Some things are never very clear. Her other Millefiori from New Hampshire was still there. Of course, her most recent acquisitions were gone. There were 17 messages on her phone, 2 from her mother, 2 from the Academy, and 13 from news media, Boston Globe, Brattleboro Reformer, Vermont Digger, WCAX, Fox 44, and more. It had already gone viral. They'd parked across the street from her house and taken video. Academy provost had secret life. Vermont teacher charged in presidential gift theft. School teacher's secret hobby. Home searched in Smiths River. Village shocked. Antique stolen from Van Buren home. Private school provost charged. Before the start of the fall term, the trustees of Martin's Academy voted 7-0 to suspend her with pay. Her job would be over once she was convicted. They'd hired a visiting teacher to take her 2 classes, and she couldn't return to campus. She assumed they wouldn't be renting her studio apartment for the new teacher. In August, a federal grand jury in Albany found probable cause to indict her. Amy did as much as any lawyer could, though Barbara was annoyed when she suggested mental health counseling. I'm a collector, not a crackpot. Be that as it may, I may get other charges dropped and get years off your sentence if you plead guilty in federal court to theft from a National Historic Site. I'm actually going to prison, huh? That's the reality. The National Park Service is really pissed you pulled this off and they want prison time. It's actually been discussed in Washington. It makes them look bad. Amy was a good negotiator. She managed to get the New York charges dismissed and get Vermont and Arkansas not to charge at all. 2 years to serve, followed by parole, counseling, and public service at a national park or historic site. Maybe she could go back to Van Buren's house. In December, when she would have been giving finals and starting ski coaching, Barbara was driven 3 hours to the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. She was housed in a dorm on the women's side. One of Trump's convicted staffers was here, but on the men's side. She spent Christmas with her new colleagues, embezzlers, drug smugglers, and car thieves. Most of them were pretty nice to her. Just after New Year, she was called into an assistant warden's office to get her work assignment. She wore tan prison khakis. Barbara, with your background, she was surprisingly pleasant, more like a teacher than a warden. You have 3 choices: teaching creative writing, teaching basic literacy, working in food prep, or some combination. We'd love to have you in the classroom this term. Warden, I need you, the receptionist called. Right back. They left Barbara alone in a chair next to the warden's desk. On the desk was a circular brass paperweight with a lion's head bas relief. Barbara said to herself, "You can't. You can have it. You can't. Federal crime. More time here. You can get away with it." The warden was back with some papers in her hand. "Sorry, always something here. So, as I was saying." Thanks for joining me for my story.